Hahaha, 99% of YouTuber products are hot garbage. If they're not an outright cryptocurrency or NFT scam, they're usually generic, dropshipped items with a logo lazily stamped on. Things get a bit more interesting when the YouTuber is a well-known specialist in that same product's category. That's very much the case with Jody from the channel Just One More Watch. Over the last 7 years, he's uploaded hundreds of wristwatch reviews and gradually become one of the largest wristwatch creators on the platform, accruing almost 300,000 subscribers to date. But it seems Jody wasn't satisfied with simply reviewing other people's watches. As you can guess from the video title, he's made his own. Introducing Erebus Watches. I think that's how to say it. Now on paper, this seems like a great idea. A watch expert making his own watches? The chances of it sucking have got to be quite low, right? I mean, his hard-earned, trustworthy reputation would be completely ruined if this were a scam. Why would he risk it? Well, it's an old maxim of mine that big bucks can change a man. Is this just his way of cashing out using his YouTube audience? Are he and his business partner, Mr. P, just desperate for their own Movado buyout? To find out, I'll be giving a brief review of the Erebus Origin, which is the launch watch in his collection. We'll look at the specs, the design, and how it compares to other offerings on the market to see if it can hold its own even without the YouTuber endorsement. Now, I'm on friendly terms with Jody, but I'm sure he wants my honest thoughts on these to inform future releases. As such, I'll provide a no-filter perspective in this video. After all, the pre-order price of $299 is a fair chunk of change for me or you to spend on a little-known watch brand, regardless of how it performs. The last thing I want is for my viewers to get hosed. I'm the one that does the hosing around here, come on. In fact, we're having a Black Friday sale on our merch site scametti.store, so head there on November 24th for an iconic discount. I've got to get these shifted somehow. The Erebus watches arrived in packaging that immediately piqued my interest. Now, they shipped in these clamshell boxes, which may ring some bells if you're a repeat viewer. Indeed, we've seen this packaging before. The Suges and San Martin watches I reviewed from AliExpress both shipped in identical or near identical containers. According to Jody, these boxes were simply for long-distance transport of these prototypes, as is evident from the inclusion of the far prettier branded box, which has space for 2 watches. Nevertheless, it got me wondering about the origin of the Origin. After all, these lads will surely be working with some sort of Far East manufacturing partner, as I doubt they've acquired their own watch factory overnight. I wonder who they went with in the end.
Turn a 10-piece to a 20 quick. I got money busting out the money clip. Make a call and hit another lick. Someone get the money count.
I became even more intrigued when I first laid eyes on the Origin in person. Immediately, the case echoed the finish of that on the titanium Phoebus Apollo. The brushing is extremely fine, providing the watch with a comparable satin-like sheen. That said, this watch is 316L stainless steel and not titanium, which probably makes sense for a first-time venture into watchmaking, and at least there's no gimmicky case terminology in play. The shape and layout of the case are very familiar to most dive watch owners, though the Origin has a slightly more angular shape than most, highlighted by the crown guards and the additional beveled edges. Now, these edges aren't your traditional high-polished chamfers. Instead, they appear to house a slightly finer or differently angled brushed finish, I can't work out which, making them appear marginally more reflective than the rest of the case. They don't advertise this steel as having a coating, and unsurprisingly, as with most other steel watches, a few small bumps and scratches have already made their way onto the surface. Still, the case is decent looking and sharp overall. I'd say better than most big brands at this price. And similar can be said of the bracelets too. These absolutely smoke the likes of Seiko or Orient. Now, there are 2 types available, a flat link and a curved link. Visually, I'd say I prefer the curved link option, but the flat link conforms much better to the arm with greatly increased flexibility, making it the obvious choice for those with smaller wrists. That said, when we cover sizing in a moment, you'll know it probably isn't the best match for super small wrists anyway. The bracelets are nicely finished, with brushing that closely matches the case, but it's the clasp that's impressed me the most. Gone are the days of frustration over insufficient micro-adjustment holes. Here they've opted for a clasp that uses a concealed diver's extension to effectively provide several steps of adjustability when that concealed button is compressed. This system isn't quite as good as some others I've tried, given that you can't slacken it while it's on wrist. However, it's more than adequate, especially at this price, and it leaves the clasp with a very sleek appearance. The quick release notches on the bracelet are mega too. In terms of function, there's another area that's surprisingly even better. Here's a clue. That's the sound of a satisfying bezel action. I have to say, this is one of the very best bezels I've tried. The noise, the feeling, the absence of backplay. Man, why isn't this just the standard? Heck, even the grip is great, not a single ounce of slippage there. It really is. Oh, it's extremely fun to use. At night, you'll see this is fully loomed as well. And in fact, the loom in general is awesome. That's right, Jody. You can put that very quote on the front page of your website if you want. Under the hood supposedly lives a Seiko NH35A. In my quest to see it, I nearly broke my wrist while attempting to remove the back, ultimately to no avail. I think I'd need an IED to crack this open, meaning the water resistance rating is probably quite accurate. This is a good movement, probably the best that Jody could reasonably attain, so props to him for not cheapening out with a noisy Miyota 8000 series, or much worse. He also didn't cheapen out on the crystal. I'd have been shocked if he'd opted for anything less than this AR-coated sapphire, given the stickies dished out to other brands for offering mineral at $500,000. This is about as good as it gets, and the AR coating has made this possibly the most legible sapphire crystal I've reviewed this year. So on the spec front, this is a home run. Assuming Jody doesn't just run off with your money. Outside of generic homage watches, you'll probably struggle to find a better built watch at this price. The Origin feels like it could take a good old Scottish pounding. Size-wise, it's also a crowd pleaser with a short 47mm lug-to-lug, paired with a 41mm case size, 40.7mm bezel, and a reasonable 12.6mm thickness. It'll probably fit most of you watching, despite being too large for me. That said, the overarching reason why people buy watches is because of the way they look. If the watch doesn't look good, or at least half decent, most people just won't buy it, me included. I want to be able to put a watch on in the morning and think, this is a really cool little thing this. Now visuals will always have an element of subjectivity to them. You may love the way the Origin looks, but me, to be honest, I'm just not 100% feeling it. I mean, it's not hideous or anything. It's not an Invicta, but all the same, it's not exactly drawing me in. The design has its high points. For instance, the dial has an interesting texture, the date wheel is neatly integrated, and the main logo is far from the most obtrusive. At certain angles, it looks nice. It's also available in a whopping 8 colors at launch, which gives you a wide breadth of options. I'd say my favorites are the yellow and teal versions, but the Origin still feels a touch too vanilla for me to consider buying one. It's hard to pin down, but the overall look feels quite predictable and safe, with square markers and plunger hands forming a style that I feel like we've seen many times before. I get what they're going for here. It looks like a stretched out Tudor Pelagos FXD, but the proportions and final results aren't as cohesive or enticing. If I had to assign blame for this gripe, I think in large part, the bezel is the fall guy. This black one is used across most of the color variants, and while the lume and action are spectacular, the look isn't so much. It's too busy for my taste, with the numbers tightly crammed between the markers. The typeface itself isn't doing anything for me either. I also tend to prefer bezels that specifically complement or support the dial color in some way, but these bezels, they really don't do that, and they just look a bit off the shelf as a result. I think the positioning and size of the logo could be improved too. If both versions of the logo need to be present on the dial, I'd rather have a smaller icon with larger text rather than the other way around. Here, the icon is so large that the Erebus text sits quite close to the pinion, where the hands connect, resulting in an imbalanced appearance despite the watch boasting a great degree of symmetry. For a first attempt though, these two bugbears are minor in the grand scheme of things. The Erebus Origin is a heck of a lot better than what I could probably have come up with, and they're well-made watches for $299 US. Apparently after the pre-order window, these are going up to $329 for the bracelet versions, and even at that price, they're a solid choice that should form a good platform for Erebus to build on in the future. That said, as with all micro brands, the resale value with these isn't going to be as good as the big brands, so just be sure before taking the plunge. I'm going for a value rating of 8.1, and that's paired with a style rating of 6.3. The only divers that pose better value than this are those in my best dive watches roundup, which you should watch next by clicking the link on screen. I'll see you there.